one of my lads, is doing an A-level in sociology. I've got two lads, both 16, twins, and as I say, one of them's doing sociology, and it's quite interesting actually, because I did a sociology A-level years ago, and he's doing some of the same stuff. So a couple of days ago he was talking about, well, they're doing the family right now, and some of the references were the same ones I remember. Wilmot and Young he was talking about, and Anna Oakley, and he was talking about a different, in relation to Wilmot and Young and the idea of the symmetrical family and domestic chores and all those kind of things. He was talking about, we had to write an essay actually about changing patterns of domestic labour, changing patterns of kind of gender roles within domestic labour. Basically saying that, citing this Wilmot and Young article from whenever it was, 1974 or something, that that men do a significantly greater amount of domestic labour than they used to. So he's talking about that, and obviously you've seen me do a lot of work around the house, so I guess he was quite convinced by that. But he was also talking about feminism. It was partly because it was in his A-level study guide, and he was talking about that. And then he got talking about hate speech, which I thought was very relevant, because that's something I've been talking about recently and been watching YouTube videos about. And he was talking about this thing about how some feminist writers use hate speech. And I just said, oh yeah, I've been reading a bit about that. And I was telling him about the video I watched that Marina the Sex, I think she's called. Maybe I got the name wrong, I apologise if that's wrong. About that video she did. I don't think he ever watched it, but it was great, just citing lots of quotations from Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon and Valerie Solanas and others, which seem to advocate violence against men, and we were talking about that. And I was trying to make some kind of cogent contextualisation of it, not really argument against it, but some kind of contextualisation of that, but I didn't really convince him. He was he was appalled by these quotations, which I thought was great. He kept saying that my defence of those kinds of writings was political correctness gone mad. He kept saying, it's political correctness gone mad, which is great. So what I wished I'd thought about at the time, actually, which I wished I'd thought about, and maybe I'll rely on the discussion when I get back home, was in relation to something that Steven Pinker talked about, actually, not in terms of content, but in terms of the form of an argument. In one of Steven Pinker's online lectures, I think it's one of his TED Talks actually, but it might be something else, and it's in relation to the blank slate. When he's put the blank slate came out, he did talk about it, and he's talking about Hobbes, and he's talking about Rousseau, and one or two others. And he's saying that the only way you can really understand Hobbes, Hobbes comes up with this stuff about how the life of early man was nasty, brutish and short. And Steven Pinker's talking about Hobbes, and he says the only way you can really understand Hobbes, or any writer really, is by understanding who he's arguing with, who that person is arguing with. And so Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan, in that passage about the life of early man being nasty, brutish and short, according to Pinker, is a response, an argument to previous arguments by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and summed up in the poem by Dryden, in which the phrase "the noble savage" is used. So when Hobbes is writing about the life of early man, and how unpleasant it was, it's a direct response to Rousseau and others advocating a noble savage myth, saying how nice everything was when we were hunter-gatherers. So it's a very specific piece of argumentation. On its own, that Hobbes quotation, I mean, it's very interesting. On its own, it's only kind of one part of that dialectic. You need the other part to form the proper synthesis. You need to know who he's arguing against. And I think the same goes for some of the feminist writers that you're talking about. I think if you just hear those hate quotes out of context, if you just hear the Dworkin and the McKinnon and the Solanas and that kind of stuff, just as it is, or you compare it to other feminist writers, or you compare it to fairly sympathetic male writers, whoever, if you compare it to those things, it just seems wild and completely inappropriate. But I think if you track down who those people are arguing against, who they're responding to, then it becomes clearer. And I think the kind of things they're responding to, the counterparts which make an effective dialectic. Well, I think they're partly scriptural writings. I think if you look at Old Testament writings, if you look at Sharia law, if you look at the words to rap lyrics, some rap lyrics, if you look at the lines, some a lot of jokes. If you ever watch Roy Chubby Brown do his stuff, if you watch any pretty blue comedian, if you spend any time at all looking at pornographic movies, particularly hardcore violence porn, I just listen to kids on playgrounds. I remember when I was a kid on the playground, this is years ago obviously, we used to sing this song called 3 German Officers Crossed the Line, which basically tells the story about this group of German soldiers breaking into an inn and raping and killing people in the form of a kind of sing-along nursery rhyme type story. I am mine. And I remember singing that. 3 German officers crossed the line. So I think if you're placing those feminist quotations, which seem completely disproportionate, if you place them up against a set of writings which are quite specific and which do act as the other arm of the dialectic, then I think they make much more sense. I think it makes perfect sense to respond to a funny childlike song about rape and murder. I think it makes perfect sense to respond to that in kind. It's not the whole story, it's just the polar position. You're just articulating the opposites, you're not creating a whole social policy. So I must remember to tell my lad that, or get him involved in that discussion when I get back. I don't think he'll believe me, I still think he'll think it's political correctness gone mad, as he says.